Statistics indicate that at least 1 in 4 women are assaulted at some time during their life, primarily by an intimate partner. Also, we know that young girls are sexually assaulted, and 1 in 4 will be during their childhood. And young boys also, the statistics are alarming, with 1 in 6 up to 1 in 7. So what are churches to do? Oftentimes when I speak in a church, I will get a response that this is such an overwhelming problem. How can churches even begin to make a dent in the problem? My name is Gerhardt. I'm professor of theology and social ethics at Northeastern Seminary at Roberts Wesleyan College. I start with telling this little simple story. Several years ago, I was visiting a pastor in a church in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I had never been in this church before, and I had never met with this pastor before. As I walked down the hallway, he popped out of his office and said he was involved in a very important phone call. Could I just hang on and wait for 5 minutes? I said, no problem at all. So as I wandered down the hallway, I noticed a table that was really full of material of local resources from the battered women's shelter, sexual assault information, local shelter, hotlines, and so forth. As I walked further down the hall, there was a bulletin board in a prominent position. And up in the middle of the bulletin board was an invitation to participate in a fundraiser for the local shelter. Still, the pastor hadn't popped back out of his office, so I walked into the restroom, closed the stall door, and there was a piece of paper with a set of questions. Have you experienced physical abuse by your partner? Have you ever experienced emotional abuse? And there was a set of about 10 questions, and underneath it was also an invitation. If you would like to talk about abuse, please contact Pastor Mary Ann with a phone number. And under that, the 1-800 National Coalition Against Domestic Violence hotline number. So I walked out of there, and as I was walking back toward his office, he popped out and said, I'm ready. I walked in, we had introductions, and I said to him, I noticed that you have a very safe church here. He seemed surprised and said, what do you mean by that, a safe church? So I told him what I had observed. The table with the information of local resources, the bulletin board with the invitation to participate in a fundraiser for the shelter, and then the very personal information in the women's ladies room where a woman would be able to gather that information, jot down a number. There were even business cards that she could stick in her purse. So I laid that out and I said, I saw all that in 5 minutes. If I was a new member, I would feel very comfortable talking about or maybe contacting someone to say, I've got a problem, or could I speak to someone? If I walked in and was thinking of joining your church and was not abused, I would know there would be opportunities to engage in the local community around this issue of violence against women. He said no one ever used that language before, safe church, but he said, I'm going to repeat this story. I said, go ahead, because this is great. And this was many years ago before there was much information out there publicly about that. That was just a really wonderful representation of a church just beginning. You know, those are simple steps. He said, that's not really anything. And I said, that's a lot. Raises awareness in the community, and it offers help to women who have been abused. So let me summarize just 5 ways that to begin to engage ending violence against women and girls and also boys. The first one is know your local resources. Make them visible. Post them. Put them on tables. And that can be something that's available year long. So those are hotline numbers, whatever resources that they need, sexual assault hotlines, and so forth. If there are fundraisers going on annually, and there usually is, it could be a walk, it could be a dinner, to just see if you can help out, participate, maybe send a group. It's a fundraising dinner to fill up a table to say, we're here as your local church. We want to support the work you're doing. Training 1 or 2 people, perhaps in the leadership team, more deeply around how do you assess violence against women and girls personally. How can you be the point person to either do an assessment or at least to refer out someone to call in the church? Those are 3 steps you can take, but there's 2 more that I think are also important. 4th, let's not forget about our children. Let's not forget about what can happen in youth groups. I've gone in and done many youth groups around dating violence. I've often heard teen girls say, well, he loves me, that's why he doesn't allow me to talk to other boys. What does love look like? What does violence look like? Because this often can be mixed up in dating relationship. But we need to provide our youth with information and a safe place to talk about abuse if they've been abused, and talk about sexual assault very upfront. So a young woman came to me, she was a college-age student, and told me a horrible, heartbreaking story of being raped when she was a young child. She was a part of a very large evangelical church, and her family was Christian, and she said the entire time I was a part of youth groups in my church, I never once heard about sexual abuse. I never once heard about anything having to do with violence, dating violence as a teenager. And so I always thought when I was a teenager, we would talk about abstinence or being a virgin, that there was something wrong with me, that I was dirty. I thought I was the only one. It was a heartbreaking story. She said it wasn't until I got to college and started hearing other people's stories I realized I wasn't alone. And she said this huge burden lifted off of me. And then she knew where to get help, and she started telling her story. But that's a very long time to be carrying that by herself and to feel isolated in her own church. So I recommend to churches, please talk about this. This is a reality. In your youth groups, 1 out of 4 or 5 of the girls sitting in front of you have been sexually abused or will be. Some of the young boys in front of you have been sexually abused and need help. But if we don't talk about that, if we don't talk about the reality and offer opportunities for these children to talk in a really safe way, then we're missing out, and our children are getting other messages that might be very well intended about abstinence or waiting until marriage, but they're reading it, if they've been sexually abused, that there's something wrong with them. And lastly, let's be a part of changing our culture both within the church and outside of the church. Let's hold perpetrators accountable. Let's make sure that we understand we need to have women and men as leaders. We need to be about gender reconciliation and restoration of relationships. And we need to empower women in all of their gifts in the church. We need all of us as Christians to be part of a culture shift. We need to identify this as a problem both within our churches and our culture, and to be a part of the conversation of what is the role of women in our churches, to offer equal leadership roles, to support women who are called to pastoring, for example, or preaching, having women lead ministries, having women and men lead together ministries, to model to our children this is what it looks like. Even when there's conflict, to model how do men and women in a nonviolent way work through conflict. So those are 5 suggestions for a start. One is pretty easy. Find out who are the local experts. Get information. Trust me, they're very happy to share their brochures and talk with you about what's going on locally. Find out where the fundraisers are, what you can do to support them to give a message to your community. Perhaps invite some of these experts in to talk during Domestic Violence Awareness Month in October or Sexual Assault Awareness Month in April. Invite a local expert to talk and have conversation, even maybe through in coffee hour. Thirdly, make sure at least 1 or 2 members of the leadership team is trained in this area, so you can be the point person for a woman who is being abused, can come and speak to you confidentially, and then even if you're not providing counseling within the church, can at least refer out, know who are the good people to provide those counseling services. Fourth, provide for your children. Know that they're very aware of what's going on and perhaps have experienced sexual abuse themselves or violence, or perhaps are in a home where their parents, there's domestic violence. So we need to have those opportunities for youth to engage. And then lastly, all of us need to be a part of a culture shift. We all need to hold perpetrators accountable, that this is not acceptable within our Christian communities, it's not acceptable within our culture. It's a crime, it's a human rights issue, it's a civil rights issue. So let's be a part of the solution. We all have a part to play.